The main character was dying in his world and told himself that he wants to free himself, he doesn't want to die. Hearing his thoughts, the mysterious man, using magic, began to summon his body and soul into his world, saying that if he wanted so, then he could help him. After that, the guy sharply opened his eyes and discovered that he was in a place unknown to him. He could not move his arms or legs, although they were not tied or something like that. Starting to look around with his eyes, the guy thought in fear, this place. How much information he receives from all 5 senses, smell, hearing, vision, as if he was pulled out of hell itself, or sharply cut into pieces. The guy wanted to continue thinking and looking around, when suddenly he heard a male and unfamiliar voice. He told the guy that he had finally woken up. Approaching the guy, the man with a stern expression on his face continued that it seems he has a gift. Having said these words, the man glared at the guy and called him a dead man. The guy looks at him with caution. Starting to pull his hand out of the long sleeve of his cloak, the man introduced himself that he was a magician. His name was Holos Carmen, and also his master, a mysterious pretender. Stretching his hand towards the guy, Holos Carmen uttered the following words, "Bow down, dead man." After these words, the guy's body began to rise on its own from the place where he was lying, standing on his feet. The guy's legs immediately fell to the floor, and it looked as if he obeyed the order of Holos Carmen and knelt down. The guy's head was lowered down, looking at the floor. The guy was thinking to himself that the bed was made of gray stone. The smell of mold he could still see perfectly, despite the fact that there were no windows or lamps, a moving body so unusual. Then for the first time he realized that his whole world was the scenery that he saw through the window. From such thoughts, the guy gave himself up to memories. He remembered how he was lying on the bed, practically without strength. He heard all the servants talking about him. They say, "What a pity." They say that his illness, the cause of which is unknown. Some servants, not knowing what they were talking about, asked each other, "Is it a terrible disease?" Well, others answered that his body constantly hurts, and apparently he can no longer move. For several years now he has not been able to get out of bed on his own. With sweat and pain on his face, the guy closed his eyes and thought, clutching the blanket in his hands, that he could hear them. Well, although this is true, almost his entire life was spent in a hospital bed, a strange disease in which pain constantly rushes throughout his body. Weakening it is getting stronger and stronger. There is not even a cure. The cause is unknown. No matter how famous the doctor is or what kind of magic he uses, there is no way to cure it. It is an incurable disease. When the pain ran through his entire body, the guy screamed. One of the servants took care of him and every time did everything possible to calm the guy down. She told him with a kind smile, but with a measured look that today a famous magician would come to visit him. She is sure that he will be cured. The guy thought that these eyes had changed. And then, smiling, he answered her, putting on a smile, that of course. Touching his chest, on the side of which there was a heart, the guy thought that now he did not feel the usual pain in his heart, or he had imagined it, or such pain as if his insides were rotting and melting, and even headaches that felt like that, as if his brain was being beaten with a rapier. He thought that this agony would never end. His consciousness, which had been in disarray for a long time from pain, it was sharper than the sharpest knife. It may sound strange, but at this moment he, for the first time, was fine. At the same time, he understood human feelings for the first time. At the same moment, the guy again heard the voice of Holos Carmen, who told him that he was a dead man, his slave, the one who returned from the other world, nameless. He would give him a name. After such words, the guy came to his senses and questioningly repeated his word to himself, nameless. What is he doing here? Has he returned from hell? Holos Carmen at this time continued that just for the one who reached the end, his name will be End. His necromancy granted him temporary life. Hearing such words, End, with his eyes wide open in surprise, thought that something that he had always been afraid of, even if he did not attend school, he had always known about those, temporary life, necromancy, who control the undead, disgusting black magicians, necromancers. He understands, the words come straight into his head. This is a feeling that everyone can easily understand. He died. Because of the spell of the person standing in front of him, he was reborn. While End was thinking about this, Holos Carmen called him by name and ordered him to come to him. End's body automatically obeyed the words of Holos Carmen and began to stand up, while End himself was shocked by what was happening. Approaching Holos Carmen, End began to follow him as they walked down the corridor. End thought to himself that how many years had passed since he could walk so calmly. To be honest, he still didn't know anything at all knows, and only knows that he is dead. But everything seems so unreal. Why was he resurrected? Where is he? Asking such questions, End quietly followed Holo's Carmen, when suddenly Holo's Carmen stopped and turned to face him and said that if he could not control it, he would not waste his precious time on him. It seems that his words finally reached him. After such words, Holo's Carmen began to walk again, and down the stairs, following him, End asked questioningly to himself how to control him. If he couldn't, damn, he didn't just save him from torment, and still, what should he do now? First, you need to understand the situation and not try to escape. Don't ask this gentleman questions. What should he do now? Having gone down the stairs, Holo's Carmen opened the basement door, and when End went inside, he was a little shocked because the corpses lay in order in the valley. Holo's Carmen ordered him to stay in this room and wait for his orders. When the man left End alone, End finally managed to control his body. Then End cleared his throat and said to himself that okay, as if his dreams had come true. Starting to look around and go forward, End thought it was a morgue, but it looked more like a warehouse. He needed more information. At first he was surprised, but a lot of time had passed, and now it didn't bother him in terms of landscaping. His room was excellent, isn't it? Is there anyone here who could help him understand the situation? Could any of these corpses be his acquaintances? Approaching a large closet with bedside tables, End began to open them, thinking that there was definitely something there. Opening the first one, End saw several fangs there. He asked in surprise, fangs. And then, having come to his senses, he closed it and began to open others, telling himself that no, he had no time for them now. Maybe there was something else. No, this one was empty. That's not it. Opening another nightstand, End saw a mirror inside and immediately smiled and said out loud that it looks like a jewel. Surprised by his own words, End touched his throat and thought that it had been so long since he had spoken, and it didn't even hurt. Taking the mirror and looking at it, End saw his reflection, and smiling slightly continued to think that this is him. The only difference between when he was alive is that this body can move freely. He wants to know about this room, and about necromancy, and about exactly who he became. Leaving the mirror, End began to walk further and saw an iron door. Approaching it, he noticed that it was not locked, and was happy about it. He told himself that as long as he had a body capable of moving, he could do anything. Having gained confidence, End already wanted to open this door, but he didn't succeed. End was surprised by this, and asked himself, what? It's hard for him, it doesn't seem to give in. At the same moment, an inflammation popped up in End's head about Holo's Carmen, who told him to stay in this room and wait for his orders. Realizing what was happening, End fell to the ground, and without taking his hands off the door, he said to himself that it was not because it was heavy, and not because it did not give in. His body obeyed the commands of this gentleman. Is he free? Better than then. He can do anything? Nonsense. Laughing, End let go of his hands and continued to think that at least when he was alive, no one ever dared to take away control of his body from him. But now he needs to obey the order of that gentleman. This gentleman, his savior in some way degree, even if he is an evil magician, he cannot refuse to help him, however. Clenching his palms into a fist, End's face was angry, and he said to himself that he would never forgive him for this. He does not know what motives Mr. Holo's Carmen pursued in resurrecting him, but he cannot forgive him for the fact that he has the right to decide its fate. Because of this, he became so angry, which was unusual for him, but despite how determined he was, he did not want to die. Having come to his senses and starting to get to his feet, End touched his chest, on the side of which there was a heart. His facial expression changed to a more confident one. He also continued to tell himself that fortunately he has a second chance, which means that there is no way he can miss it. And it doesn't matter which method he uses, he will definitely survive. He pressed his hand to his chest and realized that he had no breathing. He finally realized that he had become evil spirits. There was also no heartbeat. He could see clearly in this dark room, but somehow he didn't care, because he could still think after all. He needed to gather more information. Even if he became a being of darkness, he needed information that would allow him get out of the control of Mr. Bree. Holo's Carmen, he is alive. At the same moment, the door to the room opened. End stood quietly and did not move. Having looked at him and the room, Holo's Carmen first thought about it, and then extended his hand to End, which contained a long axe, and told End to take it. Listening to Carmen's holos, End took it, and feeling how heavy it was, he thought that he had not held something heavy for so long. Turning towards the exit, Holo's Carmen told End that they would conduct a small test. He should follow him. A few minutes later, End and Holo's Carmen were already outside. It was night outside. It was dark around. Only one moon illuminated everything around. Looking at the sky, End thought that he was outside, but he had a bad feeling. When Holo's Carmen and End began to approach the gate, Holo's Carmen raised his hand and seemed to be calling someone. End did not understand who, because his body did not react, when suddenly he heard several light steps from behind, and when the steps were already nearby, End saw that they were wolves. End became wary and asked that they were also undead. Seeing how the wolves obediently approached Holo's Carmen, End gritted his teeth and thought that he could not escape without some kind of plan. He could not defeat Holo's Carmen by playing cat and mouse with him, but what should he do in such a situation? Place like this. While End was thinking about this, Holo's Carmen opened the gate, and he and End walked a little through the forest. Stopping, Holo's Carmen turned to End and ordered him to come up and show him his strength. End was at a loss. Holo's Carmen and End continued their journey. On the way they met other monsters, but the wolves of Holo's Carmen defeated them. Seeing all this, End was surprised to think that this was already the 5th case. Looking at the corpses of not only the monsters from the forest, but also his wolves, Holo's Carmen said that they didn't have enough night wolves, but oh well, they should keep going. Listening to him, End followed him and asked himself that this is not his goal. They don't feel pain, right? These wolves, there's not a drop of devotion in them, they just carry out the commands of Holo's Carmen, necromancers. Continuing to follow Holo's Carmen, End looked at the wolves and continued that among the many creatures living in this world, they are among the most evil. He witnessed the true power of Mr. Prok, Holo's Carmen, and finally understood why everyone despised him in the end. After all, this is sacrilege towards the dead. If he defeats him, then he will suffer the same fate as these pathetic wolves. However, this forest is more dangerous than he imagined. If they are just animals, then when he tries to escape, will easily be killed. Why did he bring him here? If you think so, then he ordered him to show his strength, but still did not give other instructions. Okay. He is grateful to him that he can learn more about the surface. In this body he feels fatigue and pain, but he doesn't feel the limit of his endurance at all, and as a bonus, he doesn't need to breathe at all. Moreover, all his senses have become sharper than before when he was human. If he could concentrate, it would not be difficult for him to sense the presence of animals. End wanted to continue thinking, but suddenly a bear came out in front of Holo's Carmen. The wolves of Holo's Carmen stood and waited for an order. End looked at the bear and thought that everything would be too simple if these were the wolves of Mr. Holo's Carmen, right? In this time a bear, although it looks like a cub. Holo's Carmen grinned and said that he was the only one. Then Holo's Carmen, despite End, ordered him to attack the bear. Hearing such words, End's pupils narrowed, and he asked questioningly to himself, "What? Attack? Him?" While End was shocked, his hand trembled, and his legs themselves began to approach the bear. End looked into the bear's eyes with fear and continued to think that he was trying not to think about it. He was weak, not to mention that he would be alone fight a beast. He's never done something like this before. He's never even trained. He doesn't know how to attack. There's no chance that a worthless person like him could defeat a bear with that kind of physique. That damn, it's impossible. Seeing the fear on End's face, Holo's Carmen approached him, and with a stern voice asked End, "What is it?" This is an order. He must attack him with all his might and kill him. After such words, End's legs rushed towards the bear. Gaining speed, End jumped on top and attacked the bear, piercing his shoulder with a long axe. The bear growled loudly, but there was no fear in End's face. Soon the bear pressed its teeth into End's hand. But End didn't scream. He threw his head back and sharply grabbed the bear's ear with his teeth, and then tore it off, grabbing the bear's muzzle. End wanted to tear it apart, but the bear, using its paw, broke End's elbow. Without shouting, End raised his second hand, on which was a long axe. End thought that at that moment he felt like a monster. Swinging his axe, End cut the bear's neck, uttering a final roar, and the bear fell to the ground. But End didn't stop there. He continued to attack the bear again and again, until Holo's Carmen ordered him to stop. Because the bear was already dead, he must stop. Stopping on the orders of Holo's Carmen, End looked at his bloody hands and thought upset that he was bleeding. God. It all ended with him winning. End test. Holo's Carmen, approaching him, asked that this is all he is capable of, okay? This is expected from a body that has died from an illness. If now he cannot cope with it, then he just needs to learn how to control it. End thought, looking at Holo's Carmen, that it was a little cruel to say such a thing when he was forcing someone. Holo's Carmen held a staff in his hand. He brought it to End's wounded hand and began to say words such as, "Come from hell, the one who is frozen in time, bestow your negative energy on this corpse, reverse amplification." End's body was surrounded by dark energy, and after Holo's Carmen's words, his hand healed in an instant. Looking at it, End thought that he understood. He heard that healing magic is difficult to use. He expected this, but Mr. Holo's Carmen is truly an unusual person. After healing End's arm, Holo's Carmen turned away and continued walking, telling End that they should find another one. After some time, End was already in his room and thinking about the fact that that day he fought with 5 terrible beasts. After the battles, his sweat mixed with blood. He would like to take a normal shower. It seemed that he would be like that keep in the basement. In any case, he clearly realized his situation. He does not feel tired or pain. He sees well in the dark. It seems that he can withstand the extreme cold just as easily, and since he does not feel any pain, he should be careful, because he will not notice any damage on the body. He also learned that Mr. Holo's Carmen is a powerful magician, and that he has strong subordinates. Of course, he must take into account the fighting abilities of Mr. Holo's Carmen himself, and now he must check. Thinking about this, End looked at the door, and walking towards it, he was able to open it slightly and continued to think that when he first woke up, awareness, Mr. Holo's Carmen does not even know that he has it. He does not know that he has consciousness. Until now, he thought that Mr. Holo's Carmen always talks to himself, even when he ordered him. There was not a hint that he was waiting for an answer from him. If he had known, he would definitely have given him the corresponding order from the very beginning. The beginning, this is his chance, therefore, he should not be detected, regardless of whether he decides to go against the master or not. It is better to have an ace up his sleeve. For a few days later, End sat in his room and read a book about the undead. The book told that the undead is considered a curse. Souls tainted by necromancers become immortal prisoners of pain and can only be freed after death caused by the intervention of saints. At night, End and Holo's Carmen went out into the forest again. But this time End was more experienced, and each time he became stronger and stronger. Watching his successes under the cover of darkness, Holo's Carmen, touching his chin, asked, calling him by name, that he has become stronger. End didn't answer anything out loud, but thought that naturally he had become stronger. But why? His body was dead. Holo's Carmen continued to ask that he was just a dead man, right? He had already taken quite a lot of lives. It would be logical if he turned into a ghoul, but End did not understand his words. Looking at Holo's Carmen leaving, End asked about yourself, a ghoul. Turned, took lives. Turning away from Holo's Carmen, End said to himself with all seriousness on his face that he could start soon. When Holo's Carmen and End returned back, End came out of his room a few hours later. He quietly made his way through the corridors, and looking around he thought that Mr. Holo's Carmen must be sleeping. This is a great chance. End was quietly able to bypass the security and enter the library. He took out a couple of books from there and also quietly carried them into his room. Taking one book and sitting down, End began to open the book and leaf through it, thinking that ever since he was alive, he loved books. He did not think it would be an exaggeration if he said that books were his only friends, however. Many of the books lined up on the shelves of this library are written in a language that he does not understand. Perhaps these are some kind of grimoires. Well, in any case, he is glad that he can read at least this book. The book he took was called An Encyclopedia of the Undead. Opening the book, End read on the first pages that the dead, a type of undead revived by a necromancer's spell, do not grow over time, but accumulate negative energy, taking away the vitality of the creatures they killed, thereby becoming stronger. This is the first stage of